Rick Miller's a psychotherapist who works extensively with gay men. Gay himself, he's pioneered the use of mind-body experiential therapy to assist gay men and other members of the LGBTQ+ community in dealing with early life trauma. Through doing such work, Rick has helped many in the community discover inner strength, build personal resiliency, embrace self-love, and build strong and healthy relationships with others. In this thought-provoking interview with PFLAG Cape Cod's Rick Koonce, Rick talks about where his motivation to do this work comes from, about the challenges gay men still face in today's world, and how therapy can help anyone to overcome pain and find happiness and self-empowerment in the process. Rick Miller, welcome to Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Rick, you're a psychotherapist, author, podcast producer, group facilitator. You are a man of many hats, my friend,
yeah,
aren't
a little
you?
bit crazy, we could say.
And your therapeutic practice, I know, deals with the full range of the LGBTQ+ community. I thought it would be interesting for our listeners to hear a little bit about the nature of your work, where the focus is, and why you do this kind of work.
Okay, let's start with the last question first, which is a great question. I came out and started my training as a psychotherapist in the early 80s. And at the time, AIDS was a disease that was killing many, many people in a very short period of time. And so I thought that it would be a worthwhile thing to work with gay men, do a lot of AIDS work. I worked with dying men and their families, very painful. And from that work, I just became identified in Boston as an out gay male therapist and had a lot of LGBTQ clients over the years, and it's been my specialty ever since.
And Rick, what are the presenting issues nowadays for gay men, both individuals and couples? And I'm wondering if it has been impacted at all by the legalization of same-sex marriage.
Okay, that's a great question. So the common issues are day-to-day life issues that anyone has. But what's unique for gay men in particular is that we've grown up feeling a sense of shame because we knew as young kids that it wasn't okay to be who we really were. And even if you're not out at the age of 7, because how many people are, you feel different. You know you're not the kind of boy that your family or your community wants you to be. And you learn to edit yourself unconsciously, carefully. And so that becomes a theme throughout life. And by the time one is an adult and one comes out, the habit of being careful, selective, feeling shame bleeds into adulthood. And so there's a lot of great therapeutic information right there. You mentioned gay marriage. We were the first state in the United States that legalized gay marriage. I worked with a lot of individuals and a lot of couples who never thought that they would have an option for getting married. And people fell into two camps. One camp of people were like, I never thought I would have to deal with this. I don't want to conform to the heterosexist societal view of marriage. And then another group of people that thought, this is an incredible opportunity for gay rights. I'm getting on this and participating. And of course, there are people in between. I'm just highlighting the both sides of that.
You know, I was taken in your book, Unwrapped, which I gather is really oriented towards therapists working with gay clients. A quote really struck me as memorable. Gay men spend a lot of time being careful. And talk more about that. I know you spoke to it just a moment ago, but when gay men come into therapy, how do they present? And then how do you help them to unpack what's going on inside them?
This is a huge generalization, but go with me. With being careful comes a way in which you hold yourself in your body, a way in which you greet strangers on the street. And I had a home office in my last house in Truro, and what I was struck by was watching the gay male clients that were brand new, getting out of their car, meeting me in my office, how they would greet me. Would they make eye contact or not? Would they shake my hand? In a lot of instances, there were gay men that were so careful that they couldn't really make a connection with me. And if you want to be successful in life, you learn to project yourself, to make eye contact with people, to feel proud about presenting yourself, to feel confident that you have something to offer people. And a lot of men and women that I've worked with that have learned to edit themselves have kept themselves back without even recognizing that.
As you talk about that, I'm curious because I came out over 45 years ago, and I know you're a little younger than I am.
Not much.
I guess I would have presumed that nowadays, with the legalization of same-sex marriage, the fact it's talked about everywhere, there are role models in all of the media, but you're still finding people who come very tightly wrapped, huh?
Yeah. Sadly, the people that you're describing, there are way more people that grow up in privileged families, liberal communities, and with parents and families who don't care, and it's way easier for a lot of them. And that is true. But they still grew up in a school system when they were very young, feeling different, knowing that they were different. And then there's a whole subset of people that come from different religious backgrounds and cultures where homophobia is still incredibly rampant. So they're still editing and afraid to be themselves. And it's quite sad, which is why it's important that we're all doing this work to promote LGBTQ acceptance.
Well, and we know that homelessness and suicide rates are higher among LGBTQ plus youth. And, it's interesting, Rick, I want to ask you, when you meet with a gay client or anyone from the LGBTQ community, and you start talking about issues of intimacy and trust and connection with a partner, I'm kind of curious, how do you coach or counsel or invite people in for a conversation about how they can have those things in their lives, in their relationships?
Well, I think the most important starting off point is to make a reference to the ways in which editing earlier in life has been part of the experience. And people run a gamut of not feeling deserving whatsoever versus feeling entitled as a result of not having gotten enough of what they've needed earlier. But part of the issue is finding the place for each individual where they need to grow and push themselves. And for some people, that may be allowing themselves to experience comfort inside their own body. And for other people, it may be about allowing themselves to deserve to feel loved by another person. So sometimes it's really about, am I a lovable person? Will I let another person in because they want me?
Yes, and we both know that in the transgender community as well, there's a lot of struggle that people have around if they're lovable or not. And Rick, I'm kind of curious. When I first came out many years ago, I was in graduate school, and I remember being told that gay sexuality was different than straight sexuality. Ergo, I should not expect to ever find a committed long-term relationship. I heard that again and again and again, and I was so despairing. And I always wanted to find a committed relationship. And I have that with my husband, who I've known for 42 years. But I heard this repeatedly, and it's always struck me that people are people. And whether you're LGBTQ plus or heterosexual, our needs for intimacy, emotional connection, a sense of safety are the same. Would you say that's the case, or would you put a nuance on it?
No, I think it's definitely the case, but it's how people react to the LGBTQ plus community that's the issue. And my question to you is, were the people that told you this heterosexual people? Were they gay people? Were they both?
Well, it's a great question. And at the time I was a member, I was looking around for a place to find some good dating prospects. So I went to a group called Gamma, which was gay married men. And I attended meetings weekly. And everyone sat around, and I remember sitting in a group at one point and somebody saying, I've come to realize that I've got to get all the sex I can by the time I'm 40 because nobody's going to want to be with me after that.
Right.
And I've also learned that I can't ever expect to have a long-term relationship. And, I worked for a period of time in Charlotte, North Carolina. And at the time, I was a member of the Presbyterian Church. And I went to the pastoral counselor there, who was one of the ministers, and I talked with him about this issue. And he told me point blank, he said, I doubt you will ever find a long-term relationship. Oh, it's devastating.
Think about what those messages mean to other people.
Yes.
And it's a well-meaning, naive look at the world. And like you said, now there's more role models on TV in communities.
Yes.
So it's more acceptable to even consider that gay people can be in a long-term relationship. The stereotypes that were floating around 45 years ago were damaging to people who wanted to be in a long-term relationship. And the messages were intentionally meant from people to be helpful, but actually were not helpful whatsoever.
Well, and I remember some of the stereotypes that floated around, like all gay people are thin, wear jeans, and tight pants. Yeah,
that doesn't sound bad to me.
Yeah. So in your practice, talk a little bit about, is it a mix of, in the case of gay men, is it a mix of singles as well as couples that you work with?
Yeah, it's a mix of both. And I've been a therapist for about 40 years, and I've run the gamut of who sees me. With gay men in particular, there's a lot of individuals that come in struggling on about a whole host of issues. But over the years, what I learned about myself as a therapist is that I like being interactive and busy with people. So early on, I started seeing a lot of couples, and that's now one of my specialties, working with gay male couples, not just gay male couples. That's just one specialty that I teach about and speak about. And I also lead a lot of gay male therapy groups that focus on interpersonal dynamics and how people interact in the world. And what I've come to learn from working with these people is that the history that I was referring to about being careful earlier on stays with people. And having a sense of community in a group makes a world of difference for people. Individual therapy frequently will focus on an issue that's happening in the present, but then we peel back the layers in therapy and realize that some of these earlier issues get played out, hence group therapy or couples therapy as well.
And so 2 questions as follow-ons to that. I'm kind of curious, does internalized homophobia come out a lot, both in individual settings and in group settings?
Frequently, and there's a conscious and an unconscious internalized homophobia. The conscious internalized homophobia that we experience is knowing that we're not going to be accepted for how we talk, how we look, how we dress, and being careful to fit in. But then there's a lot of people that go out of their way to become extra masculine, meaning gay men, because their own homophobia is such that they don't even want themselves to look gay or to be anything except uber masculine. And the unconscious homophobia, which people do without even realizing it, is buying into those stereotypes and making choices without knowing it because they're so concerned about fitting in. And an example of that would be people who work at large corporations and they buy into the notion of success and don't let anyone else at work know that they're gay, that they're in a relationship, and coworkers will say, "How was your weekend?" And imagine that you don't even share details of your life because you don't want to be found out, which is quite sad.
And the energy that requires. And I'm thinking in terms of sort of, for example, the hypermasculinity, working out at the gym every day. And do your workshops entail body work, somatic work of any kind?
Somatic work, yes. So I do clinical hypnosis, which is a field that most people misunderstand based on stage hypnosis, which is used for entertainment.
Yes.
But the work that I do with hypnosis, and I've been trained in hypnosis, but these modalities are so similar. Mindfulness, guided meditation, somatic work, it's all a variation of the same thing, which is about going inside and utilizing the gifts of our own bodies and our own selves to flourish. And what's interesting about LGBTQ people is that we've grown up feeling disenfranchised, not trusting that what we have inside of us is okay.
Yes.
And then we learn to live splitting off parts of ourselves. So this very work is about claiming, owning, and utilizing successes that we have inside to feel good and to project a great person.
You know, it's so interesting you bring this up, and this is this experiential-based therapy that you're talking about.
Yes.
And I was taken with the fact that if I understand it correctly, while on some level it's about understanding things in an insightful, intellectual way, it's more about tapping into one's inner resources, things like intuition and emotional memory. Is that right?
Yep, way beyond just thinking. And going beyond thinking provides a great deal of experience, a great deal of information, and as I was saying, success. Because we don't know that we have resources inside of us, and being able to access that frequently for the very first time is life-changing. So when I tell people that I do hypnosis, they're like, I don't want to try it. I'm sure I will end up crying or I won't know how to do it. And they are so grateful to recognize that within themselves is a space of comfort and stillness and quiet and healing. Really incredible.
And a lot of gay men gaslight themselves, don't they? They've been told from the time they were young that whatever they were feeling, I mean, I can remember back in high school health class, knowing I was gay, and yet the messaging I was getting from the instructor was, well, don't go anywhere near those feelings. And so you kind of disassociate from your feelings and such. You know, it's so interesting to talk about these issues. I know you work with other elements of the LGBTQ community, I presume transgender and non-binary. Can you talk a little bit about your work with them? And are their issues similar or different?
Okay, so full disclosure, based on my age, I'm not the hippest therapist out. That being said, I have worked with transgender, non-binary people, and specifically with their families. And when you grow up with the particular presumption that you are the gender that you're born with and you're going to act a certain way. And what you're growing up with is a lot of external pressure and stereotypes and a lot of internal struggle about being different and feeling different and having to find a way to identify within yourself who you are and then figure out how the world will accept you. And that means also coming out to a particular degree, and how your family and community will either accept you and tolerate you or not. I've worked with a lot of people, sadly, who have been kicked out of their families, literally thrown out to the curb. And there's a very, very important way of being that's called resilience. And frequently, LGBTQ people are more resilient than others because they have learned to fight and persevere in their lives. And this is a secret about one of the benefits of being LGBTQ+. No one really talks about it. People mostly talk about pain for good reason, but good things can come from pain for people that have enough resources and support to be able to access that.
You know, I can recall at one point after I came out, first there's the euphoria of coming out, and then the euphoria of thinking, well, all of my problems will now disappear because I've now proclaimed myself to the world.
Well, and you got to go to a dance club, so that made you happy.
Well, that too. And it's interesting because we'll talk more about the work that you do with folks and their families, because it seems to me that if one is lucky enough to have a supportive family, that's great. And if you don't, then you're likely to be shown the street, and maybe those folks come see you one-on-one. But what about people who maybe want to, they're loving, they want to support somebody who's coming out, but they don't know how to do it? So how do you work with a family in kind of a systemed way?
Well, you're asking a lot of things that are all great questions. And I want to go back to what you were saying a few moments ago. You were talking about when you were younger and being advised by people about what gay life would be like and that you would have a hard time finding a relationship. Not every one of those people were evil. They were sharing with you what they knew. And so when you think about people coming out to their families now, what they encounter is a place and time where their families live, communities that they're part of, and many family members are not well educated about LGBTQ issues, don't want their children to feel pain, and don't even have a vocabulary for expressing this. So children frequently feel misunderstood and rejected by their parents. And in some instances, yes, they are being rejected, but in many instances, their parents are vocalizing concern, love, and protection, and the kids take it as rejection. So in my practice, because I work with a lot of individuals, but I'm also a system, couples, family person, frequently I'm the one who will suggest family meetings. And they'll say, no, I don't want to share you with them. I don't want to bring my family in here. Same thing with parents whose kids come out. But I just have a way of softening the blow, encouraging them to do it. And a lot can happen in the office of a psychotherapist because family members come in presumably on their better behavior so that they present differently, they communicate differently, they listen a little differently, and even just a little bit of progress makes a huge difference. So what I do is I give space for each person's experience. I encourage them to speak about what they need from each other, and the respect and the behavior and the hope for closeness in many instances can evoke enough of a flexibility and a change for growth to continue to happen. One of my favorite things is when I run into people that I haven't seen in years, or people who contacted me a year or two later saying, guess what? Everything is so much better. We're getting along great. We respect each other. We've come such a long way together. There's nothing more satisfying than that.
And I imagine that as a therapist, you have the authority, the credibility to convene people, and you intentionally create a place of psychological safety because on the one hand, maybe that LGBTQ person is coming in with a sense of fear and shame, and maybe the parents are coming in with a sense of, well, I don't know how to deal with this, and maybe ignorance as well. And how do you create a climate of psychological safety in like a couple session or in a session with a young person and their family?
That's such a great and difficult question because really it's intuition on my end. Some therapists who do a particular form of therapy go by a strict protocol of how to do things. I don't work that way at all. Basically, what I do is I get a sense of the people that are walking into my office. And because of being a therapist for many years, I have learned to be reassuring, to find a way to instill hope in people, but in a way that's sincere and trusting. And so that's probably what I do more than anything else, is that I normalize their experience. I give them confidence. I reassure them that other people have been through this before and it's not as hard as they think and life gets better. And there's nothing more inspirational than being an inspiration to other people.
Yeah. And well, speaking of families, let's pivot and talk about your work with gay sons and mothers, because I know this is a real sweet spot for you. Talk about that if you would.
Absolutely. So I recognized in my work of writing and teaching that there was no studies and no literature and no writing about the topic of gay men and their mothers seems a little odd. You'd think there would be way too much of that. So for me, I figured I'll write a quick article about why this relationship is important. And I started interviewing people, and within 5 minutes realized I struck a pot of gold here, because the relationship between gay boys and their mothers is so profound, because frequently the children felt as though their mothers were their saviors. And it's not that she knew he was gay and provided an outlet for him to come out. It's that a good mother lets her kid enjoy the activities that he enjoys. So for many of these gay boys, their interests were aligned with their mothers, more kind of less stereotypical male behaviors. And frequently the mothers didn't put up a fight. And this sounds so basic, but this is the very essence of what has created the magic and the power in the relationships with gay men and their mothers. And in the last 5 years, I formed a nonprofit called Gay Sons and Mothers. I have done a bunch of interviews of mothers and sons from different cultures and ethnic groups and religions, and I'm documenting what makes this relationship so profound, but also, sadly, when the relationship is a failure, what happens in these instances. Recently, we've done research from Gay Sons and Mothers, and we're just about to publish why this relationship is so special. I just gave you the basic of why it's special, but there's a lot more to it. And when you hear about this and you witness this in a mother or a son, it's so amazing.
Yeah. Do you think, and Rick, I know part of your interest in this is because of the relationship you had with your own mother, right? Can you talk a little bit about that now, sort of how she set the stage to be the kind of mom you needed?
Unintentional on her end.
Yeah.
I was the youngest, and the best defense I had with my siblings was saying, "Mommy loves me best." I just knew that was true. But as I look back, I think she liked all of us best in her own ways. But as I just described with other mothers, my mother never stopped me from doing the things that I love to do. And some of that was breaking into my sister's Barbie dolls and going wild. And she played with me, and we were pals together. And in a world of growing up where I didn't always feel safe, and I never talked about it, nor did she just loved me. And I recognize how significant that was back then.
You know, it's so interesting. My own mother was very loving, and I think very protective. But she didn't have the vocabulary for this. And I remember coming out to both of them, both my mother and my father, and they really tried to get on the wagon, get on board. And, you know, I started getting, I was in college at the time, and I started getting articles from the New York Times about the Gay Pride Parade. And
Really? Oh my God. Parents are so hip.
Well, back in the day, they were really trying, at least my mother was. And I remember she called me one day. This must have been in the late 70s. Yeah, because I was in college. And she said, you know, I just saw an episode of Phil Donahue, and he had on two men who are going to raise a child. Is that possible? And it was, but she didn't have the language and the vocabulary. And to that point, back to the work you do with families for a minute, do you find that people need to be educated about language and the subject matter here, as well as things like pronouns?
Absolutely. But look at your personal example. I don't know how you feel about your mother, but her intention was spot on and so loving. Yes. And so generous. Yes. Even if it was coming from a place of naivete or not being educated. And if the world had a mother like yours, the issues with not being accepted would be far greater than it is now. So kudos to your mom and to your family. And the goal is to promote acceptance across society for all LGBTQ plus people, so that when in your own family someone comes up to you and says, I think I might be LGBTQ, then they think, I know this person over there and they're okay. And if they're okay, you can be okay. Or I can go and speak to this person to recognize why it's difficult for me without having to rely on my child and get some information and support for myself. And this is how PFLAG was formed. And it's so profoundly helpful.
I was going to ask you, what resources do you generally refer people to, both LGBTQ plus folks and their families and friends?
Well, PFLAG is my number one go-to place, and that's, of course, where I met you. And it's an incredible resource and an incredible organization that's phenomenal. So that is my go-to place. There's a group of mothers in Utah that formed called Mama Dragons. And these were a group of Mormon mothers. And over the last 5 to 10 years, they've expanded beyond just the Mormon religion, and they have a worldwide presence. So for mothers who are struggling with religion and their children, it's an incredible group. Those are two of my favorite resources.
Wow. And before we leave the topic of mothers, I have to tell you a very quick story. I remember my mother, she did love me. I was the fourth of four, and she didn't really get the gay thing, but she tried to educate herself, and she did, as I say, send me newspaper clippings and so forth and so on.
Which is an act of love.
It is. And I remember once I brought a prospective boyfriend home for the weekend to our home in Wyckoff, New Jersey. And I was very interested in this guy. He was kind of non-committal with me. So we were there for the weekend, and I was kind of enthralled actually with him. He lived in Washington, D.C. And when I got back to D.C. at the end of the weekend, my mother called me and she said, "Do you like Dan? How much do you like him?" And then she said, "I don't think he's good enough for you."
Wow.
And boy, it was a little bit of the roar of the tiger mom. And she was right. She was right.
That was my question. So she was right. She could see something in him that wasn't quite right for you.
Yes. And I'm delighted that she met John once before her passing. And well, Rick, just a couple more questions. This is such an interesting conversation. I just want to go back for a minute to this topic of resiliency and what you were alluding to, I think, earlier before about how for some LGBTQ folks, trauma can actually be the basis for growth and the development of resiliency. Is that right?
That is absolutely true, but not without pain. So some people are just naturally resilient and find a way to strive and get there easily. But that's not everyone. So other people have to find the resources. And one of the ways of finding resources, even without going to therapy, is finding people who have been through something painful to be a guide, to be an inspiration. And people show up in our lives in incredible ways. Just at a moment in time, you run into someone who shares a story with you that may seem irrelevant, but there's something in that story that inspires you about where you're at and what you can do to grow. That's, of course, one way to develop resiliency. Of course, speaking to your doctors, speaking to your teachers, speaking to your pastors, going to therapy. There's a lot of loving people out there in the world who like to give to other people. And I'm a collector of stories as a psychotherapist. And when you walk into my office and you're hurting, I can share a bunch of examples of other people who have struggled like you to reassure you that there is a way to get beyond this and be okay. But one of the things that I also want to say is I may have been born a people person, but I wasn't born with the natural ability to help people in trauma. I've cultivated that over the years, and the world has taught me through sitting with people in pain how life works. And so as much as I am helping other people, people come in my office and unintentionally help me to give me the resources and strength to help other people grow, which is absolutely incredible.
Well, Rick, this has been a rich and wide-ranging conversation. Is there anything that we haven't talked about?
Yes. One more thing. Well, it's come up for you and I. You and I were chatting about doing this podcast, and we realized that I had a great uncle that was gay that lived in Washington, whose best friend was someone that you were friendly with.
Yes.
And it opened up Pandora's box of incredible experiences from my own childhood.
Yes.
Of being with this man who showed me indirectly that the world was filled with great opportunities. And I learned so much from him. So what I want to pass on with people that are listening is, you may be a parent, you may be an aunt or an uncle or a cousin to someone, and you may have no idea just how important you are to them. But please trust in yourself to be a role model for other people in a way that you may not even realizing, because the world is watching you, and your love and your gift will help oodles of people to grow.
So well said. And well, Rick Miller, I want to thank you for being on the show this afternoon. And I think your words, your wisdom, your experience will really resonate with our listeners. So thanks so much again.
Thank you. It's been a delight to be here.
Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.